The desert was quiet, but not empty. Dawn had begun its slow crawl across the horizon, painting the mesas and canyons in pale gold and lavender, a tender promise of the sun to come. Dust clung to the earth like memory, soft and persistent, curling around the sagebrush and tumbleweeds as if it carried whispers of 1,000 lost days. At the edge of a hidden homestead, the wind stirred a small wind chime that hung on the porch, its gentle tinkle carrying faintly across the empty expanse. A dog lifted its head from the dirt, ears alert to the faintest rustle in the scrub. And in that delicate quiet, a woman moved, her hand steady despite the weight of her thoughts, her eyes scanning the horizon with the careful vigilance of one who had learned that the world could turn cruel in a single heartbeat. She was Apache, and she carried herself with a quiet strength that did not demand notice. Her hair, dark as the night that had just passed, was caught loosely behind her neck, stray strands brushing her sun-burnished cheeks. There was resilience in the way she held her shoulders, even as her eyes betrayed the sharp edge of grief. She tended her small herd of horses, brushing them, speaking in soft, low tones that seemed to ripple through the morning air, and yet there was an alertness to her movements that hinted at the danger she had long since learned to expect. The homestead was small but sturdy, a patchwork of wood and stone, standing stubborn against the desert's relentless winds. It was a place of quiet defiance, a haven built on patience and care, but had never been free from the gaze of those who sought to take what was not theirs. Today, she felt it again, a shadow behind the sunrise, a presence that did not belong. From the ridge above the canyon, dust clouds began to rise. They were distant at first, wavering on the horizon like mirages, but with each passing moment, they became clearer. Hooves clattered against dry earth, a rhythm that was both regular and menacing. A group of men moved across the ridges, their faces hidden under wide-brimmed hats, their intent unreadable in the distance, but undeniable in the tightness of the air around her. Her hands stilled on the horse she had been brushing, and she let the animal feel her tension. It snorted softly, sensing the shift in the wind. Her eyes narrowed, and she allowed herself a slow, deliberate breath. These men were not passing traders, nor lost wanderers. She had seen such dust storms of malice before, and she knew instinctively who they were. The bandits moved closer, their laughter faint, cruel, but their attention was elsewhere. They had their sights set on another, someone they believed an easier target. She caught fragments of their voices as the wind carried them. A name misremembered, a description that did not match her. Relief and anger mixed like bitter herbs in her chest. They had chosen the wrong woman. Yet relief alone was hollow. She retreated into the shadow of the homestead, her fingers brushing the wooden railings as she passed. Her thoughts moved quickly, yet deliberately. Every step, every measured breath, was part of a silent strategy. She would not be caught off guard. She had survived too much to allow fear to dictate her life. Inside the house, the few villagers who remained stirred quietly. They were her neighbors, or perhaps witnesses, their eyes wary and anxious, reflecting the shared understanding of a land that could be beautiful and brutal in the same breath. They had learned, as she had, that survival often required more than strength. It required patience, cunning, and the courage to face the unknown with steady hands and calm eyes. The leader of the bandits, a man whose reputation for cruelty preceded him, moved with a confidence born of arrogance. He spoke in low tones to his companions, gestures sharp and commanding, unaware of the woman watching him, unseen but not unknowing. His men laughed at some imagined joke, the sound brittle against the soft music of the morning wind. She remembered another time, long before this sunrise, when she had been underestimated, dismissed, treated as fragile and replaceable. It had nearly cost her everything. Now, she let that memory harden into resolve rather than fear. She would not allow them to make the same mistake again. As the bandits passed closer, she observed the glint of weapons, the careless way they trod across the desert, confident in their perceived superiority. Her lips pressed together, a line drawn across the softness of her features. She did not flinch. She did not panic. She simply prepared, mind and body aligned in silent readiness. There was a softness to her movements, a poetry in the way she handled the small tasks of the morning. Yet beneath that softness was steel. She thought of the women who had come before her, the ones who had survived storms and raids and betrayal, who had carried themselves with dignity even when the world demanded fear. She carried that legacy now, woven into her very bones. The bandits finally passed, taking with them a woman who had been mistaken for her, a small figure swept away into the dust and dawn. She watched them go, her heart a mixture of relief, sorrow, and a simmering determination. They had taken the wrong woman, but the lesson remained. The desert was full of those who sought to claim what was not theirs. And she would not be claimed. The wind shifted again, carrying the faint scent of sage and the distant promise of rain. She mounted her horse slowly, deliberately, feeling the animal's strength beneath her, the sure rhythm of its heartbeat matching her own. Today, she would move, she decided, though not in haste. There was strategy in patience, wisdom in observation. She would follow the tracks of the bandits, learn their weaknesses, and prepare. There was a quiet dignity in the way she rode, as if each step over sand and stone was a declaration of her presence, a subtle protest against a world that often overlooked those who carried courage silently. Dust rose around her, mingling with the golden light of dawn, and for a moment she allowed herself a small smile, fleeting but genuine. The day ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and unknown paths, but she did not feel fear. She felt anticipation, a careful optimism sharpened by experience. She would not let grief cloud her vision, nor would she allow anger to lead her into recklessness. She had learned that strength was not only in action, but in the quiet moments of decision, in the silent understanding that even in a harsh and unyielding land, there was room for grace and courage. And so, she rode, following the traces of dust and footprints, guided by instinct and the subtle whisper of the wind. The desert stretched endlessly before her, a canvas of possibility and peril, and the first light of dawn touched her face, warm and unrelenting, like a promise that the world, in its vast and untamed beauty, could still hold hope. Above, the mesas stood like silent witnesses, their shadows long and patient. Somewhere in the distance, the laughter of the bandits faded into the vastness, but the lesson remained clear. She was here, she was ready, and the day had only just begun. By the time the sun rose fully over the horizon, brushing the desert in gold and amber, she had made her decision. The world would test her, as it always did, but she would meet it with the quiet strength of someone who had already faced darkness and survived. And somewhere, beyond the ridge, a shadow stirred, a hint of destiny that she could not yet see, but would soon recognize. The day was breaking, and with it, a story was beginning. The sun climbed higher, sharpening the edges of the mesas and casting long, deliberate shadows across the desert floor. Each grain of sand seemed to shimmer with secrets, as if the earth itself were breathing in anticipation. The heroine rode quietly, her horse moving with careful steps over the uneven ground, hooves sinking into the dust that carried the distant scent of trouble. She traced the tracks left by the bandits, the faint imprint of boots and wagon wheels pressed into the earth like messages meant only for the observant. Her heart remained steady, though her mind raced, mapping the paths they might take, considering the risks and possibilities. There was anger simmering beneath her calm surface, a quiet flame fueled by injustice, but it was tempered with patience. She knew that rashness would serve the bandits better than her own sense of justice. And then she saw him. A figure stood on the ridge ahead, watching the same horizon she did. His silhouette was still in the haze of the heat, but there was a solidity to him, a quiet authority that set him apart from the restless dust and wind. The legendary gunslinger, whose name traveled through towns and saloons like a whispered ghost, was observing the world with an unhurried, careful eye. His hat shaded his face, but his posture spoke of experience precision, and restraint. She paused, letting her horse feel the stillness, letting the moment stretch between them. She had heard of him, not in stories meant to entertain children, but in hushed tones of respect and caution among adults who had survived encounters with men like him. He was not a hero in the conventional sense, nor a savior cloaked in glory. He was steady, he was calm, and he was dangerous in a way that demanded attention without drama. The gunslinger noticed her as well. There was no sudden recognition, no dramatic flourish, just a tilt of the head, a measured glance that acknowledged her presence without disrupting the quiet rhythm of the desert. In that glance, she sensed a respect that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with understanding. He saw her, not as prey, not as fragile, but as someone fully capable, fully aware, and fully prepared. Their meeting was understated, almost ceremonial in its simplicity. He offered a wordless gesture, a tilt of the hat, the briefest nod, and she understood. Help was possible, but it was neither demanded nor given lightly. This was a man who recognized strength in others because he had cultivated it in himself. For hours, they rode in parallel, their movements synchronizing without conversation. The desert stretched endlessly, a harsh yet forgiving canvas, and the only sounds were the wind, the distant cry of a hawk, and the rhythmic pulse of hooves against sand. In these quiet moments, a bond began to form, not of words, but of understanding. Each recognized in the other a measured patience, a willingness to endure hardship with clarity rather than haste. The bandits' camp was finally visible in the distance, a scatter of tents and wagons, smoke curling upward where fires had been hastily lit. The heroine's stomach tightened, but she did not falter. The gunslinger rode slightly ahead now, offering a protective presence without interfering with her path. His movements were deliberate, calculated, yet unobtrusive, a shadow that would catch danger before it reached her. They stopped briefly behind a ridge, taking the measure of the camp. The heroine's eyes softened slightly as she observed him. There was no boastfulness, no swagger, just quiet competence, tempered with a human warmth that made her heart flutter with cautious curiosity. Trust, she realized, could be built quietly, in silence, in shared observation rather than grand gestures. They spoke then, in hushed tones that seemed almost swallowed by the vastness around them. No elaborate introductions, no declarations of intent, just the simple exchange of plans, strategies, and observations. She noticed how he listened, truly listened. When she spoke, how he weighed her words and responded with careful thought rather than impulse. There was a steadiness in him that complemented her own resilience. The hours stretched, and the sun rose higher, turning the desert into a sea of heat and glare. Their shared silence became a language of its own, punctuated only by the careful reconnaissance of the bandit camp. They watched as the men moved with careless confidence, unaware of the keen eyes observing them from the ridges above. And in that observation, the heroine felt a sense of calm she had not known since the morning the bandits had taken the wrong woman. It was in these quiet hours, under the vast, unbroken sky, that the first seeds of trust began to bloom. Small gestures, a shared sip of water, a quiet adjustment of saddles, a glance that carried more meaning than words, created an intimacy that was deeper than any conversation could achieve. There was a respect for boundaries, a gentle acknowledgement of courage, and an unspoken promise that neither would betray the other. The gunslinger, for his part, seemed to understand the rhythm of her heart without needing to see it. He adjusted his pace to match hers, kept his distance when needed, and yet remained close enough to intervene if danger approached. There was no rush, no urgency imposed. Every movement, every choice was measured, intentional, and full of consideration. By midday, they had mapped the terrain, noted the weaknesses in the bandits' camp, and prepared a strategy that relied not on brute force, but on cunning, patience, and precise action. The heroine felt a surge of determination, strengthened by the quiet, steadfast presence beside her. This was no fleeting alliance, no sudden rescue. This was a partnership built on mutual respect and understanding, a meeting of minds as much as a convergence of fate. The bandits, oblivious to the pair observing them, continued their careless behavior, laughing at imagined jokes and settling into the heat of the afternoon. They had no sense that the tide was shifting, that the morning had already carried the first signs of reckoning. As the sun began its slow descent toward the west, casting long shadows across the desert, the heroine felt a spark of hope. She would face what lay ahead with this quiet ally, this gunslinger who moved like a shadow and spoke like a whisper. Together, they would navigate the danger that awaited, not with haste or loud heroics, but with steady hands, sharp minds, and hearts prepared for the trials of the day. And in that moment, as the desert stretched endlessly before them, a fragile understanding took root. They would not rush into action, but neither would they hesitate. They would wait, watch, and when the time was right, the bandits would find themselves outmatched not by sheer force, but by the patient, unwavering courage of two who understood each other without words. The heroine cast one last glance toward the fading dust trail that marked the path of the stolen woman. Relief, sorrow, and resolve intertwined her chest. The wrong woman had been taken, yes, but that mistake would not be repeated. The desert had already begun to whisper of what was coming, and she listened carefully, heart attuned to every subtle shift, every faint echo carried on the wind. By the time the sun dipped low, turning the mesas to molten gold and the sky to soft lavender, the two riders had reached the edge of a canyon that overlooked the bandits' camp. They paused, silent, observing, and in that silence, trust became unspoken truth. The heroine felt it settle around her shoulders like a warm cloak, the knowledge that she was not alone, that she would not face this storm unarmed, in body or spirit. The day was far from over, and danger still lay ahead, but in the company of the legendary gunslinger, she felt a quiet, steady courage. Together, they would step into the shadow of the bandits, prepared to reclaim what had been taken and to face the consequences with minds clear and hearts unshaken. The desert exhaled around them, carrying dust, heat, and the promise of reckoning. And somewhere in the distance, the faint shimmer of firelight hinted at the coming confrontation, waiting for those patient enough to approach it with care, wisdom, and courage. The desert sun now hung high, relentless and sharp, casting mirages over the wavering horizon. Heat waves shimmered like restless spirits, bending the air and the earth itself. But the heroine moved steadily through the dust and sagebrush, her horse carrying her with the same careful patience she had practiced all her life. Every step was deliberate, measured, guided by instinct honed through years of survival. The bandits' camp came into view, a cluster of tents and wagons haphazardly arranged in a shallow canyon. Smoke curled upward from small fires, carrying the faint scent of cooking meat and the harsher odor of unwashed men. Their laughter floated through the heat, rough and careless, oblivious to the silent shadows observing from above. The heroine's chest tightened. Relief and anger intertwined, sharp and bitter, as she realized again that it was not her sister or kin who had been taken. Yet the stakes remained. Justice would be demanded, not through impulse, but through strategy and courage. She adjusted her grip on the reins, feeling the rhythm of her horse's heartbeat echo her own, and allowed herself a moment to observe. The gunslinger was nearby, a shadow among the shadows, calm as the desert itself. His presence was a steadying force, not a shield, but a silent acknowledgement that she did not face this alone. He moved like smoke, precise and unhurried, watching the camp with an eye trained to catch every shift in posture, every glint of metal, every careless laugh that betrayed weakness. The heroine slipped forward under the cover of dust and scattered boulders, her movements fluid and quiet, each step a testament to patience and intent. The stolen woman's cries carried faintly on the wind, and the heroine's heart clenched with urgency, but she did not falter. She had learned that courage was not a rush of blood or anger. It was a steady flame, nourished by clarity and resolve. The bandits had made mistakes. They had underestimated the desert, its quiet observers, and the women it had shaped into survivors. The heroine used their errors to her advantage. She moved silently among the rocks, eyes sharp, mind calculating. Each breath was measured. Each heartbeat was tuned to the rhythm of her mission. She observed the guards, their patterns, the slackening of attention that comes with overconfidence. From the ridge above, the gunslinger watched. His movements were subtle, precise, ready to intervene if needed, yet never in the way that would overshadow her. In his presence, she felt a strange comfort, a recognition that her strength was not diminished by his skill, but complemented by it. There was trust here, unspoken but absolute. The camp came closer now, and the heroine spotted the stolen woman, huddled and frightened, yet unharmed. Relief washed over her briefly, but it was tempered by the need for caution. She signaled subtly to the gunslinger, and he responded with a nod, their silent communication perfect in its simplicity. The heroine advanced, weaving through shadows and dust, approaching the bandits with the quiet cunning of someone who had survived more than her share of danger. Each step brought her closer, each movement calculated to avoid notice while keeping the target in sight. The bandits laughed, unaware of the storm closing in around them, their arrogance painting them as easy prey. The first minor confrontation came unexpectedly. A young bandit, too eager, stumbled over a rock, and the clatter caught another guard's attention. The heroine froze, heart pounding, but the gunslinger acted with understated precision. A figure dropped in the distance, subtle and silent, allowing her to continue without discovery. Their synchronization was almost wordless, a dance of strategy and trust that spoke louder than any shout. As she reached the stolen woman, their eyes met, and a quiet understanding passed between them. There were no words, no dramatic declarations, only a shared recognition that freedom was within reach if they were careful. The heroine extended her hand, and the woman grasped it, trembling but determined. Together, they moved toward the edge of the camp, shadows among shadows, as the bandits remained blissfully unaware of the danger that had slipped into their midst. Moments of tension were punctuated by silent gestures, a hand signaling a pause, a slight tilt of the head indicating caution, a shared glance that conveyed more than words could. The gunslinger remained at a distance, covering the approach, watching for any sign of alarm. There was a rhythm to their movements, a trust that had been built in hours rather than days, and it carried them closer to the heart of the camp. The heroine spotted the bandit leader, the man whose arrogance had led them into this vulnerable position. He stood near a fire, confident and careless, unaware of the eyes that tracked him from every angle. Anger rose in her chest, but she tempered it, letting calculation guide her instead. The moment for action would come, and it would be precise, deliberate, and unhesitating. Small risks were taken. The heroine lured one guard away with a subtle distraction, allowing the stolen woman to slip behind a rock out of sight. Another guard was quietly incapacitated by the gunslinger, whose movements were ghost-like, leaving no trace, no sound to betray them. Every action was measured, every step part of a larger design that relied not on brute strength, but on careful, patient strategy. The heroine felt a thrill, not of recklessness, but of mastery. She was the architect of this small storm, the quiet force shaping the outcome. And yet, alongside that thrill, a deeper satisfaction. The presence of the gunslinger beside her, his calm vigilance, the shared understanding that courage could be silent, yet undeniable. Hours passed like minutes, the sun shifting lazily across the sky, painting the desert with harsh light and deep shadows. Each step brought them closer to confrontation, closer to the moment when all the patience and observation would demand action. The heroine's mind was clear, her body alert, her heart steady. She was ready for the reckoning that awaited. Finally, they reached a position above the bandit leader, who remained oblivious, laughing at some imagined jest, careless and overconfident. The heroine's chest tightened, not with fear, but with resolve. This was the culmination of careful observation, of patience, of strategy. It would not be squandered. The stolen woman huddled close, eyes wide but trusting, sensing in the heroine the strength and protection that had been promised through silence and careful action. Together, they waited for the precise moment, shadows on the horizon, dust at their backs, and the rhythm of the desert guiding their every choice. Time slowed. The wind carried the faint crackle of fire, the murmurs of men, and the subtle, steady heartbeat of someone prepared. The moment for confrontation approached, not with fury, but with purpose. Every gesture, every breath, every glance had led to this juncture. And in that quiet, tense interval, the heroine felt something rare and profound. The certainty that she was not alone, that courage could be shared without diminishing its potency, and that even in the heart of danger, there could be trust, understanding, and the quiet bloom of human connection. The desert waited with them, silent and patient, holding its breath for the storm that would soon break. The first blush of sunrise stretched across the desert, painting the mesas in molten gold and soft pink, turning the dust into a haze of light that shimmered like memory itself. The air was still, heavy with anticipation, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The bandit leader stood near the edge of the camp, a swaggering figure oblivious to the quiet storm gathering above him. His men moved with careless confidence, their laughter brittle in the morning light. Yet the heroine and the gunslinger, shadows among shadows, had studied them long enough to see their weaknesses, the small cracks in their arrogance, the overconfidence that masked ignorance. The heroine's heart beat steadily. She felt the rhythm of the desert, the pulse of life and danger intertwining beneath the sun's first rays. She had waited, observed, and planned, and now the moment for action had arrived, not with reckless fury, but with careful precision. She moved first, silent as dust, weaving through the canyon rocks, the stolen woman close behind her. Every step was deliberate, measured, the culmination of hours of patience and calculation. The gunslinger followed from a distance, a quiet sentinel ready to intervene if the balance faltered. His eyes scanned the camp, noting every gesture, every weapon, every lapse in attention. The heroine reached the leader, her presence sudden but unseen, a shadow blending with the light. The stolen woman's hand clutched hers, trembling but steady, and for a moment their eyes met, a wordless promise that they would not falter, that they would survive. A guard moved too close, stepping on a loose rock. The sound cracked like a whip, but the gunslinger acted with a ghost-like grace, disarming the threat before it could raise alarm. The heroine's chest tightened, but she did not waver. She felt the wind carry the tension, the dust thickening around them, and she stepped forward, confronting the bandit leader with the quiet authority of someone who had endured and survived far too much to fear the moment now. The leader laughed, a sharp, harsh sound, thinking himself untouchable, confident in his men and their ignorance. But the heroine's gaze held him, calm and unyielding, and something in that stillness made him pause. There was no shouting, no flourish, only the quiet certainty of a woman who knew her own strength. In the space of a heartbeat, the desert itself seemed to lean closer, the wind whispering through the rocks, carrying dust like a silent witness to the reckoning. The heroine moved with a precision born of patience, striking not with brute force, but with cunning and skill, using the momentary distraction of the leader's arrogance to her advantage. The bandits' confusion spread like wildfire, their overconfidence unraveling under the calm, relentless pressure of the heroine and her silent ally. The gunslinger intervened when needed, but never in a way that took from her the victory. His presence was a shadow, a guide, a quiet hand ensuring that every step of justice was hers to command. In the end, the leader fell, unprepared for the skill and resolve that had been patiently building around him. His men scattered, helpless against a precision they had neither anticipated nor understood. The stolen woman was safe, her relief palpable, yet tempered by awe at the quiet strength that had delivered her. The heroine turned to the gunslinger, their eyes meeting in a moment of unspoken acknowledgement. There was no need for words. They had seen each other through danger, through fear, through patience and courage. The bond between them had deepened in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, in shared glances, in careful, deliberate trust. Around them, the desert exhaled, sunlight catching the dust, turning it into a golden haze that shimmered like a promise. The mesas, silent witnesses to the events below, cast long, protective shadows as if blessing the quiet triumph of courage over cruelty. The heroine and the stolen woman embraced briefly, a connection that needed no words, and then mounted their horses, ready to leave the camp behind. The gunslinger rode beside them, steady and silent, a guardian of the morning, a companion whose presence spoke volumes in its simplicity. As they rode toward the rising sun, the heroine felt a lightness she had not known in months. The weight of fear, the simmering anger, the tension of anticipation, all of it had been transformed into something pure: relief, accomplishment, and the quiet bloom of trust. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a tapestry of possibilities, danger, and hope. And in that vastness, she realized something profound. Courage was not always loud. Strength was not always visible. And sometimes survival and victory came not from force, but from patience, intelligence, and the willingness to trust in the right ally. The gunslinger's gaze met hers briefly, and she sensed the faintest trace of understanding, of admiration, perhaps, or respect, or simply recognition of the soul that had endured alongside his. Words were unnecessary. The desert had spoken, and they had answered. They rode in silence, letting the morning sun warm their backs, carrying with them the quiet triumph that comes from survival, justice, and patience. The stolen woman was safe, the bandits defeated, and the desert returned to its vast, eternal stillness, as if nothing had happened at all, except for the lives forever changed by courage, trust, and quiet determination. The heroine felt a surge of hope. The world could be cruel, yes, but also held moments of beauty, and there were those who saw and understood bravery in ways that were subtle, gentle, and profound. And in that understanding, there was room for connection, for compassion, for something that might, someday, bloom into something beyond survival: trust, and perhaps even love. As the trio rode into the distance, the sun climbing higher and the dust settling behind them, the narrator's voice drifted through the warm morning air. Remember, sometimes the greatest courage is quiet, unseen by most, and often carried alone. But when it meets patience, wisdom, and a kindred spirit, it becomes unstoppable. Life is harsh, yes, but hearts that endure, hearts that trust, hearts that act with both intelligence and empathy shine brightest of all. So wherever you are watching from, take this truth with you. The world may challenge you, but within you, there's a fire that can endure. Notice it, nurture it, and trust the quiet strength that carries you forward. And when you see it in others, honor it. Because in patience, courage, and shared trust, we find a beauty the world cannot take away. And with that, the story ended, not with a roar, but with the steady, enduring rhythm of hearts that had faced darkness and emerged whole, riding toward a sunrise full of possibility, courage, and quiet triumph.